Welcome back to the Faith Forward podcast. I'm John Ackerman. With me, as always, Brian Bales. And we're now in week 2 of this 24/7 Jesus series.
Yeah, we are. I always love the positivity that you give with a very chill at the beginning. You're assuming people have come back. So we are. And, you know, when we do a series like we are here at Christian Fellowship Church in the middle of a series looking at parts of the book of John, specifically the 7 I am statements, whenever we do one of these podcasts, videocasts, platform, whatever people want to call it, we hope that each one of the times that we gather together stand on its own.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you've ever seen like a really good television drama that you could come into any one show or any one episode and draw significant from it. But if you have context from the whole, you get even more. Probably the most good example, not even on television, is just all the Marvel movies. We mention them every once in a while, right? Every one of those movies stand alone. They're really good. You know, maybe some people don't like Thor: The Dark World, but that's for a different time, right? But if you've watched the whole universe, it has something deeper. Yeah. So I hope people are engaging, and it's welcome back, that they have engaged these other ones, and they get something even beyond what they might normally get in a standalone. But if this is your first time listening, thanks for listening for the very first time or the first time in this series. Our goal over and over again is to take what we study here on Sunday as a church and to not let it just stay on Sunday, but take the truth of Scripture and everything and to move it forward in our life, hence Faith Forward.
That's the plan, at least.
Yeah.
Cool. So one of the things that came up in the message this Sunday was, so we were in John 10.
Yeah.
And Jesus talking about being the door into the sheep pen, and that there are thieves that have seriously ill intentions for the sheep. And so Jesus is calling out this idea that there are counterfeits.
Yes.
Right? There are things in this world that are not the best for you. There are things in this world that are actually very, very destructive for you.
Yeah.
And that they're not necessarily just passive things, that if you as the sheep stumble upon them and choose to eat them as sheep are prone to do, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But they're actually out to get you in some cases.
That's right.
And then Jesus lays out the alternative as the good shepherd, right? That there is life and life abundant.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that you mentioned was that deep within us, we know we are built for this life with God. We know that we are wired for this abundant life.
Yeah.
Right. And you said when we look for hope or when we look for life from anyone or anything else other than Jesus, it's always going to disappoint.
Yeah. Sooner or later. Right? And that's one of the things about this conversation that's interesting, because the broader context, and our hope always is that you've taken a moment to listen to the sermon, but the broader context is what happened in the chapter before. In the chapter before, in John chapter 9, Jesus heals a man blind from birth. And when he heals him, he goes to the religious leaders because he has to be declared clean. And they're, enamored by the fact that he's healed, but they're bothered by he was healed by Jesus.
Yeah.
They were very anti-Jesus, which doesn't seem to make sense, right? Because supposedly they were supposed to be the religious leaders of the day, and Jesus is God in the flesh.
Right.
That's a conversation for a different time. The point, though, was when the blind man who was healed, would not agree with them about who Jesus was, they excommunicated him. And that tragic, horrible moment is what draws Jesus into this teaching around him being a shepherd and sheep and all of that. And I didn't mention this on Sunday. I mention it now. If you read John chapter 10, it's a pretty long section about sheep and the shepherd and gates and all of that. And it's a very Hebrew way of telling a story. And we were talking about this before we hopped on the podcast. We as Westerners, we really like linear. We don't like it when a person in a story changes positions or characters. We want him to be the protagonist all the way through it in this way, or we want him to have this position. That is not how Eastern people tell stories.
Right.
And that is not how John 10 is laid out. And so we just focused on a smaller section to drill down when Jesus says, I am the door. And he starts talking about specifically that there are thieves and there are robbers who want to get in and do damage to those who belong to the shepherd, which he was. And so if you were in the sheepfold, you belong to the shepherd. And what's really interesting, you brought this up, there's some background behind it for those of us who like to get a little bit geeky on some things.
Sure.
That many people think a thief was someone who would come in, as you mentioned earlier, and do active damage. And a robber would be someone while you're out in the field you would stumble across. It was really interesting that I thought that you brought that up. Whether that's an accurate thing, I don't know, because Hebrew people often like to just say things twice for emphasis, right? So, but he is drawing to the point in this case about the thief is anyone who promises life any way other than through Jesus Christ, because it always disappoints. And in this case, the religious leaders of the day, they were promising life if you follow this way of living, but it wasn't connected with Jesus. It was connected to Old Testament law that pointed to Jesus, but they separated away. And so, it's a good reminder that even as people are listening to us right now on this podcast, everything that we say, check against Scripture.
Please.
Go to the Bible, read it, and know that what we're talking about comes from Scripture, because, what brought this whole conversation around thieves were people who had religious jobs, who were in positions that people would say of influence, maybe even authority, that were more concerned about their selfish ambition than the truth about who Jesus is. And so they offered a false hope. Mm-hmm. And for that man, in that real quick moment, he had been living his whole life towards being accepted, if you think about it, in the synagogue, because he'd been blind his whole life, so he was ceremonially unclean in many ways. So now he'd been moving to this one point, and he's finally, in their eyes, clean. That's where his hope could come from, right? I'm accepted back into the community, and then when he doesn't reject Jesus, he's excommunicated. Right. He's worse off than he was in that group of people than he was when he was blind.
Right.
And so it is this reminder that thieves, even if they present a plausible alternative theory, which we know as a lie, to life, eventually, sooner or later, it will always disappoint. For this man, it disappointed when his eyesight came back. For you and for me and for others, I think we can point to places in our life where we believed in certain thieves that have disappointed. But there's a chance that people might be listening to this and are like, I've not been disappointed. I would just like to add to that sentence, yet.
Yeah.
Yet. Because there are some things out there that try to mimic life that can get us along a pretty decent amount of ways in life. And we just got to be on top of them, be careful and be on guard.
Right. And in the case of the blind man who's healed, he does receive one gift that is not taken from him, the restoration of his sight.
Absolutely.
But the restoration of his sight was also then supposed to give him the gift, like you said, of community.
Mm-hmm.
And that was taken from him by the thieves who proffered one thing and then handed him another. And in that case, that wasn't his fault.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know that there are times where, as sheep, we chomp down on things that we should probably know better by now, because we chomped down on them multiple times before.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook video that just popped up scrolling through. I'm sure 1,000 people have sent it to you by this point.
I'm going to use it next week in my sermon.
Really?
Yeah.
Should I not?
No, you can. Listen, maybe they'll listen. I'm going to use it. I know what you're talking about. Go ahead.
So sheep's head first in this ditch.
Yeah, hilarious.
And the shepherd, the farmer,
yeah, it's
good
not hilarious
Samaritan
that he's caught in the
passerby,
ditch. What's happened
right,
next?
is yanking on the sheep's legs to get him back out. Sheep finally gets free, shakes itself, leaps over the ditch, runs down through the grass, and it's beautiful. Like you can I want a voiceover, but like plunges headfirst back into the ditch.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, man, do we do that?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
And it feels like, again, we're wired for hope.
Mm-hmm.
We're wired to hope for the abundant life.
Yeah.
That was available and Jesus came to restore.
Mm-hmm.
And yet so often we choose anything but.
Yeah, which is, definitely at the tension in this series of 24/7. Like if we have the Spirit of Jesus in us everywhere we go, that means we have the capacity for hope everywhere if we live from that Spirit.
Yeah.
Yet, one of the things that I was, trying to think through this week is that, why is it that sometimes we make a choice knowingly, and sometimes we're sort of tricked into it, but we still have to agree to being tricked into it, to choose to live from those plausible things instead of from the 24/7 Spirit of God that is in us every day, the Holy Spirit, that is the producer of life in us. And the answer for me is that, we fall to a plausible explanation, but not an accurate explanation. And then we start wondering why our hope ultimately doesn't work out. In fact, we were talking earlier on about hope deferred makes the heart sick. a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. And there's a lot of people out there who their hope is deferred for the reason that they keep putting their hopes in the wrong places.
Right.
It's not Jesus going, hey, just wait some more. I've got you. Just wait some more and wait some more. It actually is because they have chosen to go somewhere else. It may have started because they didn't like Jesus' timing. I don't know that you and I have ever dislike Jesus' timing, right?
Never.
And we try to go find hope other places.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of times that deferment of the fulfillment of hope comes from the fact that we're looking for it. And, we have all kinds of different types of hope. Some of them are more significant than others.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And again, it's never just one thing, right? Sometimes we are that sheep plunging headlong right back into the ditch that we just got out of.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we are falling victim to the deceptions because we live in a world where we have a real enemy.
Yeah.
And there are some times where, because we're wired for hope and we're wired for this hope in the abundant life, but that hope feels like it's gone unfulfilled,
mm-hmm.
that we misplace hope, that it's not like we're intentionally diving headlong back into the ditch. And it's not like we want to be intentionally deceived, but it seems like sometimes that ache to have that hope realized just causes us to abandon hope
mm-hmm.
and allow ourselves to replace the hope for the best thing with, like you said, a plausible alternative, and elevate that to a place of ultimate hope.
Yeah.
So if we think about hope this way, that there's the hope when you go to the grocery store that you get a convenient parking spot.
Yeah.
Or there's the hope that as you're at the grocery store that you get the shortest checkout line with the fastest possible checker.
When I used to go to Wegmans, there was a guy. His name is Tran. I still remember his name. He was a machine. He would go so fast. He had a bottle of water. He'd swipe and drink. He could put 4 people through in the time like a regular person would 1.
Right.
So, yeah, I was like, I hope Tran's working today.
And those are good things to hope for, right?
Absolutely.
Nothing wrong with that. But if your day was going to hinge on whether or not Tran was working,
mm-hmm.
we need to talk about where you're putting your hope.
Yeah, we should probably talk about why I'm so obsessed about knowing the guy's name is Tran. But, I mean, he was that good, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And so, right, we have these casual hopes, right? I hope we get to take a vacation this year. In the year of COVID, maybe that hope got elevated, right? We need a vacation, let me out,
mm-hmm.
right? And we then maybe get into this level of the precious hope, right?
Yeah.
And this is probably the level of hope that informs most of our prayers because, do you quietly pray as you walk into Wegmans that Tran's working there? Maybe, but is your hope in that for the rest of your day? Hopefully not.
Yeah.
But as you get into the levels of, hopes for your family, hopes for your children, right? Hopes for this church body, right? Those are precious in a way that it feels like there's some weight to it. And if these things don't pan out, if Jesus doesn't show up, that's going to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And then our heart has this capacity, it feels like, for this next level hope.
Yeah.
And things like that are supposed to be reserved for, I hope I'm really forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
I hope God can redeem this. I really hope Jesus is coming.
Yeah.
And that we're going to get to experience the restoration of all things, everything made new. And the thing about those hopes is, if that's where your ultimate hope is, if that's where the depth of your heart is really attached, one, we know the answer to all of those questions is yes.
That's right.
You are forgiven. God will absolutely redeem whatever this is. Jesus is coming back, and it's going to be incredible beyond anything that we can imagine. It will not be the eternal church service in the sky.
Yeah.
It'll be something far beyond the best that we could hope for, because the chances that we can out-imagine God are nil. But it seems like, and again, just do a quick check on yourself here. Just stop and say, Jesus' return is enough for me. And don't do it here, do it here.
Yeah.
And see what comes up relative to, all right, we're in church, the answer is Jesus, but actually God, like, you don't even want to say it. I would sacrifice this if you could fix job, marriage, children, health,
right,
whatever. And we've swapped the hopes that we have, and that's where the thieves seem to gain so much traction.
Yeah, we talked about this last week when we introduced this series, that it's, what we believe is shown by what we do. And there's a lot of things that we know, but when practical comes to it, or someone used to say, when the rubber meets the road, we probably don't really believe it. We know it as an abstract principle. We can even say it is a true abstract principle, but whether I'm going to live from it's a different story.
Yeah.
I might know that you are able to throw me on your back and climb a mountain. I might know that. Right? That's not true in this case,
we'll
but I might know that, right? I know that, but doesn't mean I believe I'm going to let you do it. Right? No matter how many other people think you might have done it. Yeah, you're welcome. But that's the difference between knowing and belief. And when we don't believe about Jesus and His Spirit in us, what we say we know, go back to some of the things you said, right? And when we have to check our hearts now, when we go out into life and that sort of thing, when we don't believe it, what we say, what we know about Jesus, we will find other things to fill the belief. We'll say, we know this about you, Jesus, but this is really how I'm acting, what I believe. Belief is not a word in that proper context, but you know what I'm saying. And so that's the key. And then what happens is we wind up finding that they are thieves in our life. And so we talked, about the religious people on Sunday, and we talked about jobs, and we can talk about that some too. But that's just a moment. Like I wanted to pick one, and I picked that for Sunday specifically because in everywhere that I know, but especially in Northern Virginia, there's this really easy way to start living life to allow the belief in your life that your job is what gives you life.
Absolutely.
And you and I, like people, we could buy that even easier because we work at a church. I mean, you left a great job, a good job in education, and now you're working at a church. How easy would it be to say, working at a church, that gives me life for me, working at a church. Or, people might listen, I think we've all had that moment where we've allowed that to kind of steal some things.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it feels like some of what gives those things their power is what we know versus what we believe.
Yeah.
Right. And so you hear things like, Paul in prison talking about how he's been able to live in the midst of all of this and have joy. Right.
Yeah.
And you almost want to throw the flag on it and be like, no, that's just be honest.
Yeah. How can you say in Philippians when he's in prison, right? My God will supply all my needs. Hold on a second. If I understand that prison, you are chained to two different people. At best, you're in house arrest, right? And again, house arrest is not like a Beverly Hills, penitentiary. It would still nothing any of us want to be it. But he's like, hey, God supplied my needs. I still believe that.
Right. And you see where his hope is there.
Yeah.
And how then, he's probably hoping for release from prison.
Sure.
Right? But because of where his hope is, because of where his heart is, the attraction of somebody coming in and saying, hey, do something unethical, renounce Jesus, whatever, and we'll let you out. You'd be like, no, man, I'm good.
Yeah.
Right? Because of where his ultimate hope is, because of where the trust in his heart is and not just the knowledge in his head. And it feels like when we start to get those things out of whack, which we often don't even realize we do, that's where the thieves gain more power. And so whether it's, like you said, the job's an easy one, right? This is who I am. This is how I derive value. This is how I derive validation. This is my source of satisfaction. And if this went away, life as I know it is over.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's so easy about jobs and some other things we'll talk about in a second is in and of themselves, they are not bad. I mean, I'm sure there's some jobs that can be bad, but in general, most jobs are not bad.
Right.
But the problem comes in is when we misplace them and we put them in the wrong place. I used an analogy on Sunday that fire in and of itself is not bad when it's in your fireplace. But if it's in the middle of your living room, you got problems, right? And so a lot of these things in its proper place are wonderful.
Yeah.
Outside of its proper place, they try to do what only Jesus can do, or we want them to do what only Jesus can do. And then, it winds up being a tool of the enemy whose only desire, whose only goal is to steal and to kill and destroy.
Yeah. And we've come up with a laundry list of other things that make plausible substitutes.
Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of them, because I think that, maybe between the two of us, we've probably experienced a few of them.
One or two at least, yep.
Maybe people. And again, as you're thinking about this week and you listen to this, one of the things about Faith Forward is we didn't get into some of these on Sunday. Yeah. And so, I did ask you maybe think about, how God might be revealing something in your heart if you listened to me talk on Sunday. And you may in the same way just now want to go, okay, maybe this is my moment where I need to talk about this is how I take my faith forward, because maybe the job, wasn't it for me. I'm retired, so how can it be that? Or I'm 16, or whatever it might be. But there are some other things, and I think that one that I'm happy to just say at some point that for in my life was relationships.
Yeah.
And so you can think about relationships, in a lot of different contexts, but particularly in the context for me was when I got married, I was 29 years old, which, by the way, is not old. However, when you are a pastor and you are 29, there are implications. People think that because you're a pastor and all this together, of course you should be married, and that if you're not married, you must be really messed up, right? Because how could someone... And there was this thought that, you know what, if I get in a right relationship, and I never voiced it, by the way, I never thought to myself, this is how it works, that this will give me a better identity, this will give me purpose, I'll be better at peace. And there was a lot of people, truthfully, that had a difficult time communicating to me. One of the jokes I have with a lot of the single adults I used to work with, that was my first job, was, isn't it really weird when you get together with your married friends and all they can ask about is who you're dating? Right? They don't know how. So it's not even just us, right, trying to find life from relationships. Yeah. If you don't have one, there are people around you do that. And the interesting thing is, just because you then get into a relationship and maybe even that relationship leads to marriage, that still doesn't mean you get life from there. Yeah. Because no matter how wonderful your spouse is, and I think anyone who's been married for any amount of time realize that they cannot be Jesus. No. They, everybody makes really bad gods, except for God. And so when we begin to invest in that, if I just have this fixed in my relationship, I'll have life. Okay? If I just have this relationship, or not even just, these sort of romantic relationships, I think there's a lot of people that think relationships with friends, relationships with coworkers, whatever, if I meet the right person, I know the right thing. Yeah. And all of those, ultimately, if we put our trust there, even if you wind up having a good relationship. And so I feel unbelievably blessed by being married to who I'm married to. It took till I was 29, but it worked out pretty good so far. We've been married 20 years, right? And I don't want this to sound morbid, but here's what I know. That relationship is going to end. Jesus is returning. One of us are dying, right? We may die at the same time, but still it's ending. If life comes only from that, the statement was, we will eventually be disappointed. Yeah. It may last till I'm 78 or 80, but then I realized, oh my, that still wasn't what it needed to be. It was a plausible alternative. But what I like to say, it was saccharin in a sugar world. Sure. We like to, I like sweet and low. That's what I use in my coffee. But I also know it's not the real thing. Yep. Right? And there are some things that can get us by for. Relationships are one of them.
Yeah. And I think we mentioned money on a previous podcast, so that had been an issue for both of us. But for so much of my life, and there was a stretch there when I was in middle school where we had very, very little, and so there was this feeling that Jesus coming back or steady income when I'm older. Yeah. Like I will latch onto this with both hands because this just seems uncertain. And then even as an adult, right, there was that sense of, if I can just get a level of security, then I'll have happiness. Yeah. Right. And maybe money can't buy you love, but I can find a lot of things that it'll bring me joy with. And it was so hard to see it for a counterfeit first and foremost, because it didn't feel like it was a bad thing. It felt like, working harder, earning a larger, like that. Yeah. That's not horrible.
Yeah. And I think actually one of the challenges, if you're listening to this and you are local, you understand the context of what we're talking here. In Ashburn is Loudoun County. And Loudoun County is typically one of the top 3, if you consider by family median income, most affluent counties in America. Yeah. So America is already the most affluent nation. Yep. Loudoun County is one of the top 3 most affluent counties. And usually the only 2 other counties are the one that has Aspen, Colorado, mostly vacation, right. Not a lot per capita there. Yep. And I think it's Nantucket, Massachusetts on the island. So when it comes to actually non-vacation place, we're number 1. Right. I say that because there are a whole lot of people who from a very real aspect, even from people here in the United States, would look at them and go, they should have life when you are making X amount of dollars a year.
Yep.
When we moved to this new location, we had done some research about where we may, from the land available, where we would want to put the church, and just did some demographic research from the areas around. One of the areas that we looked at, I was dumbfounded, right? I knew there was affluence in there, but the 50% within 1 mile, the average family income was over $200,000. 75%, the average family income was over $150,000, right? And granted, things are more expensive here, but that's still a good amount of money.
It is.
It's still a good amount of money. But yet, there's so many people that don't have life.
Yeah.
Right? And the belief is, especially if we live in an upwardly mobile scenario, that, well, if this is going to give me life and I've made $250 a year or $50,000 or $25, all I need to do is grab the next rung and that's going to have it. And you can spend a whole lot of time doing that, and then all of a sudden you realize you don't have life. You have worry, you have greed, you have misplaced hope, you have all of those sort of things. And I think any of us who've ever been in a place where, you know, we thought that if I just make this amount of money, I'll be happy, and then we make that amount of money and we're not happy, have to stop and go, whoa, why is that so? Or, you know, we put a whole lot of, I guess what I would say, comfort into our 401ks, or if we happen to have one, or 403bs, or whatever it may be, and then the stock market prices, right? And then you thought, hey, I was on the road to retirement at whatever, and now that road has, you know, a stop sign on it, and it's going to have to wait.
Right.
So I think that is another example when we just talk about money, but that money thing also has a lot of connection, at least in my mind, to I think another counterfeit, and that's power.
Yes.
Right. And I didn't tell you I was going to ask this. When I say power, what do you think of? I feel like I'm giving you a cheer. When I say...
Now my train of thought's totally off.
All right, sorry about that.
No, you usually think of things like, you know, government, you know, being a history teacher, monarchy, you know, riches and influence and things like that.
Yeah. Ability to gain, when I think power, ability to gain what's needed.
Yeah.
Right? And so if I'm looking for life and I have power, I think, well, then I can gain it. Right? And so I think that's another thing. And in many ways, too, and that's the key. I think there are lots of times people start out looking for something in a good way, but then it changes, right? You can start out wanting to be an educator for all the right reasons, but you know, educators they're kind of in a track. This is what you're going to make. Everyone kind of knows it and that sort of stuff. So you can substitute power for money, right? I want to have this position of influence and this position. And again, that sounds ridiculous, right? Because none of us wake up in the morning and do that. And that's the key. When I was talking on Sunday, you know, I used this term for verse 8 to describe thieves and robbers. I said, there are scammers out there, right? They're scammers. And the best scams have just enough truth in them, right? They know just enough about where you live or what you like or whatever it may be to get you to walk down that road. Now, fortunately, hopefully we catch ourselves, right, before we walk down the road. But sometimes the way we caught ourselves is we walk down that road and it doesn't give what it promises. And that's what these things do. We got relationships, we got power, we have money. But, you know, we make notes, you know, to give us some guidance and that sort of stuff. You wrote down something here that when I read it, I was like, that's true. You wrote down things that can act as thieves of life is, I'm going to use this term, normalized fear. What do you mean by that?
So this is a hard left from some of the obvious ones, right? Because we know that there's a lot of, like, jobs are good, relationships good, money even is good. Right. Love of money, we know Scripture says not good.
But I want to hop in before you say that, because you just made this good point, right? The obvious ones. But these are, the obvious ones we just mentioned are things that at first glance can seem good but bad. We don't even talk about the obvious ones that we all know are bad. Right? Like, we don't have to go into, hey, what about addiction? What about all this other stuff? We all know that. Right? We stay on guard at that. So now you're going to like this sort of next level to where maybe it's not more of a thing like power, which is, you know, kind of a thing, but certainly when we think about money, relationships, jobs, you're talking sort of an attitude or a heart.
Right. Yeah. So other things that we often turn to without realizing that we do for our highest level of hope or life one of the things that I realized that I had turned to throughout my entire life without realizing it as my hope for comfort, security, safety was fear.
Mm-hmm.
Which, that probably sounds weird, just left on its own. But what I mean by that is fear felt like it gave me control, in the sense that when things were out of my control and I couldn't do anything, that's a very powerless feeling, right? Fear made me feel like I'm doing something.
Yeah.
And so without realizing it, my fear response to many instances felt like security.
Mm-hmm.
At least I'm doing something, right? And fear, it's heightening my senses, it's heightening my awareness. My fear will protect me, right?
Sure.
And you've used this analogy before, right? If you're standing in front of a lion at the zoo, you don't need to be afraid. If you're standing in front of a lion in the middle of the Serengeti, probably ought to be afraid. That's good God-given fear.
That's right,
there.
yeah.
And so there were so many instances in my life where fear felt like the appropriate response.
Mm-hmm.
So many moments of the unexpected or the difficult or the traumatic or the painful, that fear just started to become a sensible, automatic response to things. And so rather than my hope being in Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
rather than my hope being in an abundant life, my hope was in my fear response to give me a sense of control and a way out.
Yeah, and a lot of times we don't recognize, and so if you're listening to this and you're hearing this and you're hearing it more abstractly, the way I would say it is a lot of times we don't understand our dysfunction is not functional until we hit that wall.
Yep.
Because our dysfunction has been working. You do a lot of handyman stuff. I think I've talked about this before, but you can hang drywall with a hammer and nails.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it. You can hang drywall with a really heavy boot and nails.
That's true.
Right? But that doesn't make it functional.
Right.
That doesn't make it ultimately good. You can get far, but then you're going to hit, in the construction analogy, a literal wall, but in our analogy, a proverbial wall.
Yeah.
And we can become so normalized by this fear that it seems right, but it's stealing joy, and we don't even know it. Now, I know we probably weren't going to talk about this. We're going to go anyway because I love to talk about movies. A couple weeks ago, we mentioned Princess Bride, classic.
Yep.
Right now, somewhere in the world on TBS, I guarantee you Shawshank Redemption is playing for those people who don't know that movie. Why have you not watched it by now? But I recommend the TV version, not the unedited version.
Yes.
But nonetheless, there's this scene where it's contrasting, where one of the main characters in the movie, Red, finally gets out of prison, and he's in this sort of halfway house.
Yeah.
And he gets to the halfway house, and it's a place where a friend of his that he knew from prison before had already been.
Yeah.
And they have differing sort of responses around this idea of fear and controlling them. So, boom, go.
And this is the movie scene that always comes to mind for me when I think about this concept of things that we don't even realize are affecting us like this. That, before Red gets out, the old librarian in the movie, Brooks, he finally gets paroled and the guy's ancient. I mean, well past 29.
Well past 29.
And he finally gets out. I mean, this thing that we would imagine any person in prison has been eagerly awaiting.
Yeah.
And he gets out and he gets to this halfway house and he gets a job in a grocery store, and he does not know what to do with his freedom, because in his mind, his safety, his comfort is in the roles and routines that he's learned through decades of being a criminal incarcerated, and doesn't know how to function as an employee, doesn't know how to live on his own now apart from the community that he had in prison, and he ends up taking his life.
Yeah.
And then moments later in the film, one of his fellow inmates, Morgan Freeman, Red, gets out, ends up in the same place at the same job with some of the same sort of inner demons of, I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been. It's become so normal for me to be a criminal. It's become so normal for me to have to ask permission to go to the bathroom that he says, I can't go unless I'm given permission. And the shift for him is that somebody invites him into a completely alternative way of living, a completely different identity that offers something totally separate from the thing he's always known.
And I think people who are listening, who've had what this would be called a crisis moment, where that is revealed, they know they're thinking of this moment right now. Right? If you've never had that, it's not a question of if you're going to have that in your life. It's only a question of when you realize your dysfunction isn't functional. Yeah. Up until that point that they got to the halfway house, there was nothing to actually reveal to them in reality, something that they may have thought in their head, that this isn't how it's supposed to work, that this doesn't bring life, this doesn't that. In the same way, until we run up against things, when we lose that job, when we use that as an example, when the relationships don't pan out, when we don't have power, when we lose all our money, or when all of a sudden we realized, oh my, I've been crippled by fear, but it's been my comfort zone. It's been somewhere that works for me. I remember there was a moment in my life where God just made really, really clear what I thought was normal behavior was a whole set of workarounds in my life to not have to deal with my fear and not have to deal with these sort of things. And I thought that was giving me life. It was helping me function. But all it was giving me was less than life. It was a thief. Yeah. And so if you're listening, one of the things that I think you can really, do is, as we kind of get to, well, what do we do? Solutions is there are some things we can do. Reveal prayers, revealing type prayers, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that can be really helpful is, and again, we always begin with ask God.
Yes.
Right? That is the answer to virtually every question. Ask God. But we also know that learning to ask God and then learning to hear what God is saying in response is a process. Yeah. Right? It takes time, it takes growth, it takes experience. But there are some questions that we can pose, honestly, just to ourselves that can be very revealing. And so one of those would be just like we did earlier in this podcast of take a second and say one of those things out loud that you know is true. Like, Jesus, you are enough for me. And don't say it here, say it here. And see what comes up. And if it's a sense, just like we wanted to do with Paul in prison, of like throwing the flag and be like, no, I'm calling foul on that one. That's not. Those are really helpful, revealing prayers of inviting God into this space of, I know this is a thing that should be true, but what's coming up out of me is not hope. And it doesn't feel like a hope in the abundant life. It's the hope that may be true and that might be good for someday, but actually I hope this thing over here is true.
Yeah, we say at the end of every service, Jesus, I know you can do immeasurably more than all I ask or imagine. But there are times that those words have come out of my mouth and I'm leading it. And Jesus is like, really? Right? Really? Is that how you're living? As I believe. And I know that. So when you start sort of, giving yourselves these truths, right? Pick them. There's a bunch of them in Scripture. And then check your heart reaction to that. That's an insight of some places where a thief may have gotten in and began to present a plausible alternative. That, God isn't going to supply all your needs, so your job has to supply your needs, or I have to supply your needs. Here's a big one for me. I developed a big stronghold in my life when I was young. I have to take care of myself. God is not going to take care of myself, so I have to take care of myself. Even though it says God is going to take care of me, which supplies my needs. There was a moment in a time where there was something that happened in my life that was very hard and difficult for me, and I had an opportunity to make a choice. Am I going to live from the 24/7 Jesus Spirit that's in me to give life? Or am I going to live from something else that is going to promise life but really wasn't going to deliver it? Now, here's the thing. While I was making that choice, I had zero idea I was making that choice. It wasn't a cognizant thing for me. And part of the reason why, at that point in my life, I wasn't nearly living on guard at the level that I'm now.
Right.
And so part of what you need to be thinking about, too, is what does it look like to live on guard, right? And living on guard, a lot of these things, is just even, for example, if you're having a hard time believing, not saying you believe, but actually believing and live from this. One of the best things is just continue to remind yourself of these. When it talks about meditate on Scripture, people are like, I don't know how to meditate. And I always say, if you know how to worry, you know how to meditate. It's the same thing. It's just on the positive aspects of God's Word instead of the concerns of our life. And then as that happens, Scripture actually tells us as we meditate on it day and night, whatever this is, it begins to sink in and moves from something from the head to the heart.
It does. And that may feel like, again, just hearing that, really? I'm just going to say this over, right? That is so revealing in us. And that's an indication often of a direction we need to go. These just started coming to mind as, lists of dangerous prayers that I have heard and often not wanted to pray. But one that I heard, and it took me a while to actually be comfortable enough to say it, is modeled around the idea of Jesus' prayer in the garden, as he's praying for not only unity, within believers, but that they may be one as we are one.
Yeah.
Right? And so not only unity this way, but oneness this way, right? That we will get to have the same oneness with the Father that Jesus does. And so the prayer was, God, I will trade anything. I will give anything to be closer to you, to be one with you. And I kid you not, I was convinced within 5 minutes of uttering that prayer that God was going to demand things like my wife, my job, my bank account, my health. And it was so revealing to see where I was actually putting my hope and what I thought about God.
Yeah.
That the God that I was praying to in that moment was a God who was a lot more like a thief, that really just wanted to take things from me as a bait and switch.
It's really interesting you say that. I had this every once in a while when we're talking, we say this, like you have this moment that even pops in our own minds. I still remember as a young adult, so I grew up a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ, better at some times in my life than others. But I still remember there was a very palpable moment that I never wanted to say, God, I will do anything for you because I believed that if I said that, God would send me somewhere that I would be miserable, right? In the character, he would send me to the middle of nowhere in, hot climate, sand, just it would just be miserable. And it's a complete misunderstanding how God would be, right? That if God called me, he would empower me. He would do all of that. That's not how a good father works.
Right.
And that's revealing to me. If you said, that was a lie that I was believing. That, this is where I was putting my trust. This is where I'm putting my hope in my physical location when my hope should be in Jesus and his Spirit in me and guiding me.
So if asking God is difficult in this particular moment, at this particular time, to feel like you're going to get a clear answer, those kinds of prayers are wildly helpful, incredibly disruptful, kind of painful, but they're really good at gaining some traction in this direction. Now, if it feels like asking God questions and receiving some sort of clear response is working, I mean, you can just go straight to the heart of the issue and start asking questions like, God, what am I believing about myself when it comes to where's my hope? What am I really relying on or trusting in for security and comfort, right? You can go directly to, God, what do I honestly think about you? Are you really the God that I can't trust, that's going to send me to the middle of nowhere, that I'm going to hate, that's going to take every good thing that I've acquired for myself, right? Which then kind of leads you back to what do I think about myself, right? But there's so many valuable places in our heart that questions like that expose, and that really then help us shift and reorient to where our hope is properly placed, and where those statements that we've sort of half-jokingly referred to as not helpful become wildly helpful. That God, you are trustworthy. You are all that I need. You will provide. You are able to do immeasurably more than I could ask or imagine. Your plans for me are good and not for disaster, to give me a future, right? Those things suddenly start to not just be known, but they start to feel true in a way that then makes the attempts of the thieves and the scammers way less successful, because they're not offering you something that suddenly is dear as it was.
Good words, man.
So hopefully that's been helpful. That's always the goal. Hopefully hearing some of our stories and our own struggles has, if nothing else, provided illustration to what this can look like.
And if it hasn't, it's been helpful for us. And I'm good with that. Not that we do this just for us, but I really believe in, as we talk sometimes, God uses our time of processing to reveal stuff in us, because that's how God works. And maybe God has been, though, revealing something in you right now. And if you don't know where to go with that or don't know how to process that, we would love to come alongside you. That's part of what it means, taking our faith out of Sunday forward in your life. And so just let us know. We got an email this week.
We did.
Awesome. It was great. Send us another one. If that's you and you want to talk some more, we've responded. But if it wasn't you, but you want to engage something we've talked about, you can just email us at faithforward@cfcwire.org. And myself or John or both of us, depending upon what day it might be, we'll get back to you. And we'd love to just kind of go deeper, because, we all are stuff to be on guard. We all probably still have some thieves in our lives. And what does it look like, though, instead to give up those counterfeits and instead walk in the fullness, life to the full that Jesus promised?
There is an abundant life, and it's available now. And man, when you get a taste of it,
Good thing.
It's good. So thank you all for being a part of this. We'll see you next time.